And the second one deals with what is also implied as nuclear terrorism.
Yeah.
And I assume you've never had any personal contact with either one of these subjects. So how do you familiarize yourself with the details, the nitty-gritty of these topics?
Well, maybe we should talk a little bit about the second one, because actually that takes partly place in Hungary too.
Yes.
Well, there were two beginning points to this story. One was that there was we caught a small article, barely even an article really, on a place in Copenhagen, I think it was an old auto repair shop or something, that the police had to clear, because there were about nearly 100 people living there with hopelessly inadequate sanitary facilities and so on, and sleeping on floors and so on, and all these people sharing just one loo or something like that. And they were all coming from Eastern Europe. Some were Romanian, some were Hungarian, and they were pretty much all Roma. The story in the paper was really, graphic pictures about the filthy conditions and all of that, and sort of how can human beings live like that? And we thought, we started thinking, how can people live like that? Why do they choose to do so? Why do they come here and pay ridiculous sums for such substandard accommodation? What is it that drives them, and where do they come from? So that was part of the impetus for that one, and also the other half was we were lucky enough to have we are lucky enough to have a good source in the former operative chief of Danish intelligence, and we talked to him a little bit, and we knew that there was a lot of concern about radioactive material floating around and coming out of the eastern countries when the war went down, and that we knew that certainly not all of that had been accounted for. And we thought, we don't really want someone to just find an unexploded atomic bomb or something like that. But there are other ways in which radioactive material can be spread. And there was an incident in Brazil a number of years ago, where in the ruins of an old hospital, someone had found what used to be inside an apparatus for radiation treatment, and they'd cracked it open and got at the radioactive material, and it had because it was a little bit like the glow powder they used in carnivals and so on. Someone had actually sort of smeared it on their skin and brought it home and showed it to their neighbors and so on. And about 120 people got really ill with radiation sickness, and 4 of them died. So we used that, because when we try to talk to people who knew about these things, how do you know exactly how quickly something like that would spread and how lethal it would be? And because actually the answer is it's less lethal than you'd think. I mean, a lot of people have come into contact with this. And yes, they did get sick, but only 4 people died. So basically we thought, all right, we'll take that. We'll have some young Romas, a little board, breaking into an abandoned military hospital in Hungary, and suddenly there's been a bit of an earthquake. Not now, don't worry. So the basement that has been sealed off since the Soviets left has a part of the floor has collapsed, so that you can now get into the basement, which you couldn't before. And they find something like that, and that's the whole start of it. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking too much.
No, not at all. So ultimately, your novels about Nina Borg are based on, it's grounded in some fact and something that actually has happened.
Yeah.
Kati, is the same true of your novels? Or are they just works of imagination?
They are, I would say, like 98% of work of imagination, but they could have happened, I would say. Like in The Hummingbird, one of the main themes was the honor-related violence in Kurdish community in Finland, and it happens. But I didn't research like real things for that book. I used my imagination. I don't much like to do research. I do it only that much that I have to do. But I was just talking with someone that nowadays, like, everybody can Google everything. I don't want to put too many like real facts like din 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 din, because I find it somehow very boring, and it's also bounding my imagination if I do it like that. Mm-hmm. And well, there are murders in Hummingbird, naturally. There are joggers get shot by shotgun when they are jogging in a remote jogging path. And that was from the idea, because I'm a hunter myself. I have 2 shotguns, and I was many times thinking that if I would shoot someone, if I would need to shoot someone, I would use shotgun rather than for example, pistol or rifle or whatever, because you cannot trace shotgun. You cannot say that this bullet, or they are not bullets, but anyway, I don't know the word in English. What is the thing you put in the shotgun?
Cartridge.
But anyway, you cannot say that it came from this certain weapon. But with rifle and other types of weapons, you can do it. So the shotgun is perfect. It's very noisy, but if the murder happens to take place when the time is, like, when the hunting season starts in remote North Finland, there's nothing else you can hear for a couple of days, like bang, bang, bang. Everybody's shooting ducks, so you can shoot somebody there too.
Okay, well, we don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
I think I've read somewhere that Finland is one of the countries in the world that has almost as many firearms per capita as the United States.
Oh yes, we do. I think it might be even more. I actually have the actual amount of the weapons in the book. I don't remember it anymore, but it's huge. But they are all legal guns, and they are, most of them, like almost 100% of them, are for hunting.
Yeah.
And there are not any accidents. Maybe sometimes something, but really low accident rate. No. It's usually hunting rifles and hunting shotguns. These are the weapons we have.
I want to move as quickly as possible to give the audience a chance to ask their questions. But I have one last question of all 4 of you before I do that. What was your inspiration for writing crime novels? Do you have a model? Is there some writer who you felt was inspiring to you? Jørgen?
As you said, I was working as a journalist when I started writing novels. I was actually writing historical articles, popular history, and I've always been very interested in history as the subject of history, and for me it was it started with the historical matters which I was working on. It was actually supposed to be an article about autopsy and the history of autopsy, but then I started working on it, and I found this could be maybe a good novel. I didn't think crime novel at the time. But there's something about crime fiction and and the history that a historian. what do you call it when you're working as a historian? Is that yeah? He would he would go into the sources and do investigations, and he would try to reconstruct what really happened. And that's a lot of what the detective do in crime fiction as well.
Yes,
you have the murder, and then you have the time before the murder, and then you have the time after the murder, and you have some of the same structure as in history. And and I found that to be interesting, and that's why I wanted to do a crime fiction eventually. And of course, I mean, if you're working with autopsy and you're trying to figure out murder methods, I mean, that's that's always interesting. So I mean, there's some very interesting murder methods in my first books.
Absolutely. So it was history that led you to writing crime fiction.
Yeah,
not reading
that.
Some other author's work.
Well, of course, I've read a lot of crime fiction myself, but it was history. Yeah, I would say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kati, what about you? Has there been any author who's been inspiring to you?
I've been inspired by many authors, like not only crime authors, but I'm a big reader. But the crime fiction, to me, I think it was kind of accident, like a accident child, but very beloved one afterwards. The thing to me is that I want to write, and the writing is my passion. That is what I want to do. It happens to be crime. I don't know why. It was just an idea at first, and then it took me. Yeah.
Okay. Agnete?
Well, I read a lot of crime fiction, especially when I was a child. So I would say very basic. Agatha Christie and, all the crime fiction, Sjöwall and Wahlöö, the Swedish writers that I mentioned, probably would be the way my interest got started.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But that we came to write crime fiction was actually quite accidental, and it's still. We tend to get really interested in the characters, and then and building the plot and so on. And then at some point, we sometimes stop and say, "Have we murdered anyone yet?" And we have actually, with a couple of our books, gone all the way through, and it's entirely debatable whether a murder actually took place when you go back and look at it. A crime certainly took place, and there was violence and criminal events, but it doesn't. The first book. The very first scene in the first book is a woman opening this suitcase and finding the boy inside. I mean, he's been left in a luggage locker at Copenhagen Central Station, like he was luggage, so much luggage, and folded up inside this suitcase. But the point is, he's still alive. So it starts off not with someone finding a body, but finding someone who is actually still alive. And because our protagonist is a Red Cross nurse with the obsession I mentioned, she's actually quite a difficult detective to work with. I mean, I suppose she's technically an amateur sleuth, but she's not interested in finding out who did it. She doesn't care who did it. All she cares about is rescuing something or somebody from the ruins. That's her motivation. So eventually we had to, when we came to the second book, we had to invent a police character simply because she didn't want to investigate, or didn't care to investigate, so we needed someone who desperately had that as his drive.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, with the first one, we didn't know much about police procedure apart from, Agnete obviously had some insights because of her job at the crime desk of a local newspaper, but we didn't really know enough to write a police procedural, and we were aware of that.
But we didn't care either.
Oh, actually, that's part of the problem, because when you get to the procedural stuff, basically, usually what happens is that Agnete says, "I get really bored writing that stuff," and I go, "Okay, all right, I'll do it."
Okay, well, thank you. Can you hear me up there in the back?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to dispense with the microphone then. let's open this up to questions, and I'm going to stand a little bit forward so that I can actually see you if I do this. So, question.
Would you be willing to share your opinion of American mystery and crime writing, and do you have any particular favorites?
Would we be willing to share our opinion on American crime writing? I mean, that's a huge field you're asking us to have an opinion on, yeah. Well, I mean, I've been very inspired by people like Sarah Paretsky. I think she writes a mean detective novel, and I love her main character. I think on the whole, I find that the American tradition is much more about the lone investigator, the very private eye, even in the sense that it's quite often a first-person narrative. And what we've found is that we write multiple points of view, and we've actually found that seems to be a barrier for some American readers. I'm wondering whether it's because then they haven't really been trained in multiple points of view. But apart from that, I don't think I have much to offer.
Well, I've read a lot of the classics, the old, like Raymond Chandler and Hammett, yeah. And of course Edgar Allan Poe, which is way back, but that's part of the tradition as well. I mean, I think we have to be honest to say that American crime fiction is an inspiration to all of us, but it doesn't always come in books. It comes in all the shows, the series that we can most of them view in Scandinavia as well. So I mean, we're kind of surrounded by it, and maybe we take it a little bit for granted. It's like really good crime shows. They come from United States. So, but I do agree with Lene, in the thoughts she had about the first person narrative and anything. Even though it's not always a first person narrative, the individual is very important in American crime fiction, and the status of the individual is kind of Yeah.
Well, I won't analyze the differences between American and Nordic crime or anything like that, and I won't even mention any. No, I could mention maybe Raymond Chandler too, but there are two, two American writers that have really, really inspired and influenced me. I love their books. They are not crime writers. They are Toni Morrison and Annie Proulx. Absolutely fantastic literature.
Well, of recent things, I really enjoyed Gillian Flynn, and that's because I think that's interesting. I think to us when we're writing that some crimes tend to go cross-genre now. They sort of they blend into the novel, and I think Gillian Flynn is a good example of how it's a crime fiction, but it's not really crime fiction. And so.
And it's also an example of multiple viewpoints.
Oh and a very clever use of them too.
Yes, exactly.
I would just like to know if you have difficulty getting your books translated into English, because I have a friend of mine who's Danish. She comes back from travels with all of these books, and she's raving, except they're all written in Danish. So I was just wondering if you have difficulty getting them translated into English, or is it a given that it'll come?
Well, could you hear that up in the back?
Yes. Well, there has been such a demand, I think, for Scandinavian crime fiction that we actually do have to sort of wait in line for the translators to have time for our books. But in our particular case, we've been I've been lucky, and she's been very good, because she actually translated our first novel into English. And but otherwise, yes, it is a problem because there are just not enough qualified translators, and the quality varies a lot.
I think also translators are underpaid and undervalued, which doesn't help.
There's no translator listed for your novels.
It's Stephen Murray. Yeah, it's he's the translator for all my books. He's actually now finished the third one, so there's another Odd Things that are coming out this winter, so that's good. But it's Stephen Murray. He's a real good translator. I think he translated the Millennium series for Stieg Larsson. Yeah. So yeah. So I'm lucky to have him.
You talked about how you did the first draft, dividing the chapters. How do you edit and revise?
That's when it gets really interesting.
Edit and revise.
Yes. Well, we thought at first that we would have to rewrite each other's chapters in order to blend the voices. But we found actually probably because we'd been talking up a storm for so long that we'd somehow actually managed to find a voice that is distinctly Kaaberbøl and Friis and not how we would write individually.
Actually, our editor has never been able to tell which one wrote which chapters.
Well, until we were a bit rushed with the final one, and I had to turn in. We had to turn it in before I had time to do the commas in Agnete's bits.
I have comma dyslexia, so that's
a real disease. I've finally come to realize that she really can't help it. In the beginning, I couldn't understand it. I mean, she's an intelligent woman. She should be able to learn how to do it. I just didn't understand. But she really, 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 I mean, she's capable of inserting a comma between the subject and the verb. No problem.
But I'm working on it. But anyway,
am working on it.
Yes. True. But anyway, the point is, of course, we find that there are problems in each other's chapters. But basically, we point them out to the person who actually wrote the chapter, and then ask the person to fix it. So each chapter is written, finished by the person who started writing.
You get to fix your own mistakes once you've actually agreed that there might have been a mistake.
Yes.
Question?
Over here.
I've read Scandinavian mysteries, but most of my experience is through TV and movie adaptations. And based on that, it's amazing anyone's alive in Scandinavia. What also impresses me is the gruesomeness. They seem to be more gruesome than the murders that we get in American mysteries. Any comment on that?
Karen Slaughter. I rest my case.
Yeah.
John Sanford.
Yeah.
Well, but I think you have a point, maybe. I mean, I'm talking about my first book. You have quite gruesome murders there, but that was sort of my plan when I wrote that book. To as I said, I wanted to write also about the tradition and the history of crime fiction. So I wanted the murders to be kind of gruesome and brutal because of that. And I think it also, I think it has something to do with what we were talking about when we started, about the Norwegian and Swedish and Danish societies, Finnish, are really tranquil and peaceful societies, and the contrast between the really gruesome murders and the peacefulness is a very effective contrast, I think, so, in a literary way.
Can I just say, okay? Because also I believe there is a trend that it's getting to be more and more violent, and I think basically it's just because you want to make stuff even better or perfectionize something. Okay, I've made this type of murder. I want to make it even more. It's not a trend that we buy into, because we really don't like the very
Very graphic.
explicit graphic violence. And personally, I don't find it necessary to make a good story. And I really don't enjoy reading books with that kind of graphic violence. So it's just.
I think it also says something about the way the author sees his audience. If he thinks that's why they read his or her books, I think that's a very depressing way, really, of thinking of your reader. Ooh, I'd better make it a little bit grimmer and worse and more horrible, because that way they'll like me more. I don't think. I mean, I said earlier that I think that Nordic fiction, to a certain extent, is more why-done-it than who-done-it. But I really don't want it to turn into how-done-it. I mean, that really the intrigue of the story is all about just exactly how utterly painful and horrible this murder was. I think that as an author, if you want to do your job well, you have to have a very good reason for why you're doing. Why are you putting precisely this in your book? And one of our very good friends and colleagues in Denmark had some of her books made into movies, and the movies was just. They were completely splattered with blood everywhere, and she was asked why it was like that, and she couldn't really answer, except she said, "Okay, this is sort of what we feel the audience wants now," and that's just, to me, that's not a good enough reason. So I think you can absolutely make graphic violence and make it beautifully and well and with the aesthetically.
Yeah. But the point is, to me, there has to be a very good reason why you would use that specific tool to tell your story.
It's dead easy to grow someone out. All you have to do is explain exactly how it feels and smells. And I mean, if you just poke a screwdriver through someone's eyeball, and I mean, that's easy, but it's not interesting.
I don't like to write very detailed illustration of violence. Like, I don't find it interesting, and I don't find it important. Also, I rather there is violence, but I leave the reader to imagine it. How it happened. Actually, I don't like to give all the details. And also, I'm more interested to explore the consequences of violence. What happens after? So the family of the victim or whatever.
I have to. I think the thing about violence in literature, we have to remember it is literature. So it's, and I think maybe people sort of tend to forget that, and they stop reading and interpreting when it becomes too violent. There was a story book which came out in the 1500s in Italy, in Napoli, called Pentameron, which is, and it has the undertitle "Stories for Children," and it's one of the most bloody books that maybe has been written. It's there's one story there about a woman who flays herself because she doesn't like, she's an old woman and she's wrinkled and she doesn't like her skin, so she flays herself. And it's very graphic, but still, I mean, there's a literary interpretation in it, and it's valid even today. When it comes to making your face be more beautiful, the plastic surgery and stuff like that. And even though there was a nose job done in the 1500s in Italy, they didn't really, have those references then. But with new references, the story is still valid and it still lives, and that's the beauty of literature, And I think even though, you find things in the book that disturbs you, you should, as a reader, still read it in a literary way, try to interpret it. But I do agree with the other authors here. Some writers just put violence in the book for the sake of violence, and then it's not effective, or it doesn't work the way it should. You have to have a thought about why are you doing this, and what does it mean? Is it a metaphor, or what does it do in your book?
Yes. I can speak just about Norway in this reference, but I know that the governments have been somewhat restrictive in how much violence you get to see in those countries via TV and music and other things that they've been pretty restrictive of. Do you think the genre has grown from that kind of restriction? It makes you a little more expressive?
The question is about Norway, where the government has limited the amount of violence that can be depicted, can be reported.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they're lightening up now, but it has changed a lot in the last 10 years. But yeah, the 80s is the right period to pick.
E.T. was not allowed to be shown because of the violence in Norway, or the violence in the movie.
No, it was shown, but I think it was cut. Yeah, some scenes were cut. And there's a lot of examples of that. And Norway is, I don't know about Finland, but I think Denmark and Sweden were more liberal when it came to. I myself lived when I was a young kid close to the border of Sweden, so we could go to Sweden and see
for the hard stuff.
See all the stuff, see the violence, and even
and look what happened.
Yeah, look what happened. So, but it's an interesting point. Is it kind of because it has been held down? Is it now flourishing? Maybe, I don't know. But it's an interesting point.
Yes.
So, excuse me if my question goes on for a while, but I had the opportunity to visit Sweden and Denmark last year, and speaking with many of the people, and also reading about these countries, there is an unusually high trust in institutions in all the Nordic countries. And someone I met from Sweden told me an interesting story of how a bus of Swedes and Finns had driven close to the Russian border, and when a Russian guard came and just demanded some money from them because of unspecified laws, they just paid up, because obviously why would an official of the government ask for money? And on the other hand, in Nordic Noir fiction in general, we see institutions are infiltrated by neo-Nazis and KGB agents and members of the mafia. So has any of you used your fiction in a way to warn your fellow citizens to not be blindly believing in institutions, because they can fail? I mean, as Lene, you pointed out with the refugee children in the orphanage, that if not for some of the citizens themselves, but for some of their less privileged members of society who they don't see, that you shouldn't always trust what's happening.
In the Nordic countries, I think we have the least degree of corruption, and we have a very high degree of trusting each other. So basically, if you meet someone on the street, you would automatically assume that person will do you well.
It's probably it's given as one of the reasons why we continually make it to the top of the happiest country in the world lists.
Yeah. But of course, I think we have a very good example in Denmark. Some time ago, we had one of the very big public companies of electricity was sold to Goldman Sachs.
Yes, and I'm sorry, but I think we had better just spell it here, because otherwise it ends up sounding sort of really wrong, because it's spelled D-O-N-G.
Yes. And
nobody in Denmark thinks that's funny.
No. There was a huge controversy about that, because a lot of people thought that it was being sold to for a
ridiculously low price.
And afterwards, you found out that one of our ministers had actually gotten some sort of seat or position in the
on the board,
and another position in somewhere else, and probably have benefited hugely personally from this deal. And to Danes, at least, that's a very foreign thought. So of course, you have to imagine that it's unthinkable for a Dane, but of course it happens. And so we shouldn't be blind about, of course, there can go things wrong within the system. So yeah, definitely, I think it's a good point that we have to think the unthinkable, even though we have that.
I think we also do deliberately try to puncture the smugness. Because you can get so complacent about the. I think this is not only a Danish disease, it's also very much, for instance, a Swedish disease. We think we've got the best societies in the world, basically. And we can get quite smug about that. But and there's an arrogance that goes with that. That is not helpful. And so yes, we do sometimes deliberately go after that.
I think we do have corruption and we do have a rotten system also, but I think it's very well hidden in these countries, and also because people trust so much into these institutions, we don't look at that way, that we would see what's really actually happening there, because there is happening a lot of bad things.
But not as much probably.
No, not that much probably, but like for example, there were like many Finnish politicians and whatever who now it was revealed that they used state money and put them into Panama bank accounts and whatever. It's there.
We're running out of time. We may have time for one more quick question. No diatribes, no speeches.
Don't feel bad. We liked your question.
Quick question. Anybody? Yes, Ruth.
This kind of political question, given how great the governments are, and
I don't think we ever said the governments were great.
Even-handed pretty much.
We didn't.
And what's your opinion of the state of things now that there's been a huge influx of immigrants?
Yes. How has it? What do we think of the huge influx of immigrants and the problems that's created, particularly our country's response to it? It's actually more or less, it's become a thing with Danish cultural personalities when they go abroad. They have to sort of stand up and say, I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed to be Danish. I'm ashamed of what we do. And then they get criticized at home because they're out there probably with Danish money. They've been sent to this foreign country and then they're doing down their country. But yes, I think it is I think what we are doing at the moment is shameful. And I think it's wrong.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I don't feel the same way as Lene on this one. I think the situation is unusual with this many people going to our country, and the Scandinavian countries are very popular among refugees because once you get in, you get your citizenship or your
well, the equivalent of a green card. Yeah.
Then you automatically have access to, as I said, free healthcare, free schools. You can go to university for free. You can sort of set up an entire life, and it's hugely expensive. And for the countries to sort of deal with, okay, we've set up this completely secure internet net for our citizens. How many can we bring inside that circle without it collapsing? And so it's a discussion you have to sort of be open to. And I think the Danish government has chosen as one of the things to make it very unpleasant to be a refugee in Denmark. And that's only because they hope that the refugees will flock to another country. and it's because we don't have any effective way to sort of distribute the refugees. And so it is a real problem, and I can completely understand why why people are getting a little afraid about what's happening, because as it is now, we had about 100,000 people coming in, last year and this year combined, with their families having the right to come. So it's a total of 100,000 people, and we're a country of 6 million. And people, those are people who are having trouble. They don't know any Danish. They have a completely different culture. So it is a problem. And I don't know what to say. It's just difficult. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's. Oh, no, I bet we had better not start discussing this amongst ourselves.
I think the thing to remember is, you have both sides in the Scandinavian countries as well. You have the ones who are skeptic to immigration and immigrants, and then you have the ones who are more open to them. And I guess I'm one of those. I think we're only, as you said initially here, 27 million people in a quite large area, rich area. Rich in natural resources and in education and in culture, and I think we will only be more enriched if we can do this in the right way and welcome these people into our society. I think we need them to grow and to be a better society, and they come with their resources and they have a lot to offer us. But I think it's more a question of pacing. You can't do everything at once, so you have to have restrictions and you have to have a sort of control of how many who's coming and when they're coming, and so this discussion flourish up when there's last winter and in the spring when there was very many coming in. So, but I think it's basically a good thing.
You know what Finland government did just a couple of weeks ago? We got this huge amount of refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, everywhere. And now suddenly the Finnish government decided that these countries, when they go through their applications, the asylum applications, now these countries are safe. So they have a rule that they can send them back. Before, these were considered not safe countries, but now when we have so many of these applications, we had to do something for this. Okay, let's make them safe on paper so we can send them back. And actually, the defenseless is about that. There is a asylum seeker from Pakistan who didn't get asylum, and I will say, I don't know this. Really, these words are difficult to me in English. But for Finnish people, we have this Finnish Foreign Ministry advice for travelers, where they say that, for example, Pakistan is extremely dangerous country. Don't go there. And the same with Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, Syria. Don't go there. No, Syria, it was not in that list. That is not considered safe country, but the others are. So for Finnish people, it's extremely dangerous, but for these people who fled there for their lives, it's safe. They can be sent back.